Welcome back to Thoughts and Coffee. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about the negative effects that pornography causes for those who watch it. I wanted to talk about this episode for a while because if I admit I am a former cybersex and pornography addict, and I'll be straight up off the bat. Even saying former addict for pornography sounds a little false because I've definitely watched some porn during this pandemic. I've watched less, way significantly less than I used to. Back in junior high and high school, I was introduced to porn at a really, really, really young age. But I wanted to talk about this because I think it's super important, and I do think that pornography is just generally really bad for people. I don't think it does a lot of good. I know there are some positive side effects for watching porn, which have been recorded, but I think that the negative outweighs the positive by a large margin, and I think we would just be better without it in our lives, But before I even get into that, I just want to say, if you're new to Thoughts and Coffee, this is a meditative, relaxing, normal podcast where I share my thoughts while we drink coffee together. It is a Sunday morning normal podcast, so I try not to dwell on really negative things. I just try to make people think. So I don't want anyone to think that this is super negative. I'm going to end this on a positive note. I'm going to share some, scary thoughts on this whole thing. And if you're not a porn addict, you might want to listen just out of interest, because this is something that can apply to, I think, everyone. And if you are a porn addict, you definitely want to listen to this, because this should help you throughout this pandemic, whether we're in quarantine in your city or not. Most people are staying home for the most part to avoid getting sick. That being said, let's begin. So as I said, I used to be a really big former porn addict, and I got so addicted and introduced at a very young age. I was like maybe 11 when I got introduced, and the worst part is I've heard stories about people who've been introduced to pornography at like the age of 7, as young as that. Which is just absolutely terrible. And it's not a shocker why. Especially given to the amazing advancements we've had in the 90s since the internet has been created and everyone owns a computer now and an iPhone now. Even little kids have iPhones. It wasn't a luxury my generation grew up with until much later. People being introduced to porn very young. Pornography can get so bad and you get so into it that your brain runs out of things that it's into and the types of categories that you watch for porn. And so it will start going to maybe something like cybersex, which I got addicted to, which is basically, not even basically, it's literally the addiction of dirty chatting, whether it's with strangers, people it's bad. And again, the reason that that's so bad is just because I jumped to cybersex when porn wasn't enough at a certain point for me. My brain got sick of it, seeing the same images and videos and categories over and over again. It's so bad. And I can do an entire video on cybersex alone. I'm sure I will at some point. But I want to talk about porn just because that's more relevant to people, even though cybersex addictions, oh yeah, very high. Statistically, I've seen very disturbing studies about how high that's rising, and I do think that is rising in general, regardless of having a pandemic or not, because we're stuck at home all the time. But I just don't think porn is a normal thing we should associate with in our lives. It's just sort of weird when you think about it at the end of the day. It's very new still, just from a human behavior standpoint. Like, the idea of watching people have sex, especially, just like the idea of that is so odd. Like, that's new, and let alone it's new how quickly you can access it. You could pull your phone out and that's like, you just get that within less than a minute, less than 30 seconds, really. It's a weird idea, and that's something to consider, because I don't think it does good. Like, I've never watched porn and after I've been like, I feel good about doing that. It's always a feeling of guilt or shame or negativity, and if you're tied to some sort of religion, it's really, really heavy, because I used to be religious and have a Christian background, so I used to feel really guilty, and I feel less guilty now when I do it, but it's still there. And there's science behind that, where your brain gets activated and feels depressed pretty quickly after, but that feeling will dissipate, usually fairly quickly, but it really does depend on the person, because I do know people who say they feel guilty for like days and days, and that used to be me back in high school. And again, that could be because of the Christian ideology I was tied to, or could have been I was too young to watch that stuff, which I definitely was. I mean, there's no appropriate age to watch porn just based on the negative feelings, but it was interesting to keep that in mind. I look around the world right now, whether it's from a political standpoint, it's just like a group identity and a heavy ideological drive to push sort of your group belief, your team, it's or your just the effort to put out your belief systems to force them down people's throats politically, religiously. It's crazy. It's even like attacking science, and it's just, we're living in a very, very, very angry time right now. And a lot of negative feelings are associated with the wanting to relapse to pornography. When you feel negative, you generally want to go and fill your brain with dopamine and stuff of that nature and jump to pornography again. And I feel not only being trapped at home, but living in a society, in a world where worldviews are being hammered down people's throats on tons of different ideological groups with their platform, is gonna naturally cause a relapse in pornography, which it has. It's not good. The suicide rates have risen, depression has risen. It's very dangerous. And I just wanted to remind people, if you're out there, and again, whether you're addicted to porn or not, because I'm not really going to give you the answers right now about, how do you stop watching porn? There's a few ways, because I'd have to make this episode longer. I'm going to try and keep it around 10 minutes, but the general idea is, for starters, why don't you just fix 10% of your life if you want to stop watching porn? Don't try and fix a giant effort in your life. Or a bunch of it, especially since it's the new year. A lot of us had New Year's resolutions. A lot of people are going to go, I'm going to be vegan, and I'm just going to be vegan, which, likely you'll fail, because it's hard to just make such a sudden change like that. Mentally, physically, it's going to affect you a lot more than you realize. And yeah, it will in a good way eventually, but for that short-term pain you have to feel is going to be very difficult to overcome. But doing something like, you know what, I'm going to only eat red meat twice a week. Maybe you do that for 3 weeks, a month. And then after that, you move it to red meat once a week. And then a month later, maybe you go no red meat. And then you slowly decrease it from there. Fixing 10% of your life instead of a big sudden change is the best way to do it. And what I did was I started reading 10 minutes a day, which eventually turned to 20 minutes a day because I enjoyed it. And I started meditating and journaling, and all of that has had a huge positive effect on my ability to stop watching porn and just be happy overall. And that's something you need to do. And again, I can go through a list of things that you should do to help stop watching porn, but that's not what this episode is about. It's just more about being the outlier, someone out of success of watching porn. So what I'm going to leave with is this. We have these phones, these devices that can do so much harm and damage. You could waste hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours watching pornography at a very young age and be introduced to very dark stuff, and then eventually lead to stuff like cybersex, or God forbid, even worse. Maybe you're watching very violent porn, which there have been studies on. It's not good. It's not good. I've seen lots of studies suggesting bad stuff of that nature as well. You have this device that can cause all this damage, but that same device, phone, can really benefit your life in amazing ways that it never has in humanity before at our stage of the world, despite the negativity, despite the social media drama and negative news and politics and all of that nature. I'll tell you this, I used my phone as a way to serve my addictions, like cybersex and pornography, for thousands of hours of my life when I was in high school, really missing out on a lot of opportunities that I could have taken advantage of, which I'm taking advantage of now, thankfully. But that same device I bought Bitcoin when it was $1,000 and sold it at a very nice profit. And I don't say that to brag in any way at all. I say that because your phone can do remarkable things if you put in the effort to learn about new things instead of watching porn. When I slowed down, I started putting more effort into studying things like investing and in single stocks and Bitcoin, and I'm doing okay. And I sold my Bitcoin a long time ago, and I made a lot of money. Fortunately, it didn't make as much as it is worth now. Geez, it's like $40,000 as I'm recording this. But my point is, I took something bad and I turned it into something great and beneficial, and I'm still doing that to this day. And it's not just investing. There's podcasts you can listen to where you learn so much wisdom and philosophy and financial and spiritual and physical health advice. There's so much you can take advantage of with your phone instead of the bad things. So just as we're in this weird state in the world, consider that. Whether you're an addict or not, consider taking your time and using your phone as literally this superpower that it's meant to be, not this curse that most of us use it as. Thank you again for listening to Thoughts and Coffee.